Reading with your kids.
Hola, ni hao, konnichiwa, assalamu alaikum, shalom, mahaba, moni muli wanji, namaste, jambo, bienvenidos. Hi, my name is Jedley, and this is the Reading with Your Kids podcast, an iHeartRadio Best Kids and Family Podcast Award nominee. We are so delighted and so grateful that you're joining us in our mission to help families grow closer through reading. Please be sure to subscribe to the show in the iHeartRadio app, on Amazon Music, Spotify, Apple Podcasts, wherever you find your podcasts. We have two wonderful guests for you today. In a little while, Oliver Chen will be joining us to tell us all about Immedium Publishing. But first, our friend C.B. Lee is joining us to let us all know about her brand new YA title. It's called A Clash of Steel. Hey, C.B., how are you?
Hi, thanks for having me back. It's great to be here.
I'm really excited to have you back. We loved having you on earlier, and we've been following each other in social media. And I just want to say at the start of the show, congratulations, C.B. is a new mom.
Thank you so much. Yeah, it was really exciting, actually. I remember my doctor giving me the due date, and I was like, "Are you sure?" Because it was the same week that A Clash of Steel was actually due. But time-wise, having everything happened in the same month, the baby was actually born after, they were late, about a week. So there was a little bit of spacing, but it was all nervousness and excitement, but now that we're in it, I'm excited to be a parent, and it's been a great adventure so far.
Yeah. And, it just dawned on me that your baby and A Clash of Steel, they're like kind of twins almost.
I would say different. I think creating a story definitely takes a lot of time and energy, and it is a book it is a story that's very close to my heart, and I'm happy for it to be in the world. I feel like a child is quite different because I'll get to see them grow and change. Mm-hmm. Whereas the book will always, it is interesting because I think writing A Clash of Steel, when I wrote it, I feel like I would have approached it differently. Because the entire book was written and finished before I even knew I was pregnant. And I feel like who I am now versus who I was, when I was writing the book, it feels like a very specific, moment in time, right? Mm-hmm. So, it's interesting to me because that's like a freeze frame, like who I was when I wrote that book. And, and so it's interesting to look back on. I'm still quite proud of it. I'm really happy with, that it's in the world and people can read it and share, but books are yeah. I that metaphor ran away with me there.
But you're absolutely right. I have a vivid memory of feeling myself change the minute mm-hmm. my son came into the world. Mm-hmm. I mean, it was a physical thing that I felt. I just knew that my life had changed, and I wasn't a completely different person, but I was never going to be the person I was before he came into the world. I knew my focus, my energy was going in a completely different, a new direction right now.
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah, it's a beautiful thing too. So tell us about A Clash of Steel.
Sure. Earlier you mentioned that it's a middle grade. It's a young adult novel. Oh. I feel like it might be advanced for some middle grade readers, but a lot of middle grade readers do read up. I did see in School Library Journal they did recommend it for grades 9 and up. But it is a remix of Treasure Island. It's part of Philo and Friends, a series called Remix Classics. And so the series takes on gives different authors the opportunity to reimagine, a different literary work. Also in the series is So Many Beginnings by Bethany C. Morrow. And then next March, Travelers Along the Way by Amina May Safi, which is a Robin Hood remix set during the time of the Crusades with Muslim protagonists. And so A Clash of Steel is really my take on Treasure Island, as in, it's an adventure story set, in the early 1800s during the South China Sea. It's very much inspired by the real life of the pirate Zheng Yisao, who was arguably one of the most successful pirates in all of history. And so it's an adventure story. It's about finding who you are. It's about defining yourself, and really it's about what I hope readers who are excited about, whether you're like a fan of the original Treasure Island or if you're just looking for an adventure novel, I hope that people find this historical fiction engaging and fun to read, and a great opportunity to learn about a piece of history they might not have learned about.
Yeah, and I'm embarrassed to say this, especially having hosted so many young students in our home from China. When you're mentioning, that this was one of the most successful pirates, I had never put the idea that there were pirates in other parts of the world. That there were pirates beyond Blackbeard and all the ones that we grew up learning about here.
Yeah, and that's a very specific perspective that I wanted to engage with, because the idea of what makes a classic, right? Everybody knows Treasure Island, everybody knows who Blackbeard is, and at the Blackbeard had a couple hundred ships, right? Zheng Yisao, at the height of her power, commanded over 3,000 ships, and she literally had an army of pirates the size of a small nation, and brought multiple governments to their knees, and the British, the Portuguese, the Americans, the Qing dynasty, the emperor, no one could stop her. No one could. And her power was that she had united all of these different ragtag pirate squadrons, she basically was the terror of the South China Sea. No one could get in and out of that port without her say so, and every trade was completely blocked and controlled by the pirates, and eventually the Qing emperor in order to eradicate the pirates, went about they tried waging war against them, but eventually what they ended up doing was they offered a bunch of pardons, and Zheng Yisao quote unquote retired, but she retired on her terms, right? She held when the governor general was hey, we need you to accept these terms, she held a city hostage for 3 days and was nope, you accept my terms. I'm going to keep this. They were you need to give up all your ships. And she was nope, I'm keeping, a great number of ships so I can continue to run my smuggling business or whatever. And then she just settled down in, near Macau somewhere, and opened up a gambling house and continued to smuggle and run the underworld for a number of years till she died of old age.
Wow. What a fascinating character. And again, I'm embarrassed to say that I've never heard of her. She's somebody, talk about a role model, not necessarily in that she was she was a pirate.
Right, but she totally captures the imagination, right? She's a character, the fact that any school age child can tell you who Sir Francis Drake was or who Blackbeard was, but what I wanted kids to engage with was to think about it's not embarrassing not to know who she was. It's really a product of our culture and where we are placing value on what we are teaching in schools, and what is considered hey, these are the classics you should be reading, or these are the histories that we're going to read. And, even when we learn world history, it's very much a specific focus on a Western or European, when you think about maritime history, exploring the world, what you said earlier about I had no idea there were pirates in other parts of the world. Yeah, there were a great number of people who traveled on the ocean, and, whether they're committing crimes on the ocean or not, but people think about that rhyme in 1492, Columbus sailed the ocean blue, but or 1792, but, nope, I'm mixing it up.
1492.
It was 14. I had it right. But like, we think like during in his travels, much earlier than Columbus discovered, quote unquote, if you can just claim a place as discovered, he traveled to North America and he traveled all over the world. And there's like all these different pieces of exploration and, that like other cultures have done that aren't like not necessarily well known, but like, we don't see them with the same significance, right? And so A Clash of Steel really to me is about centering that experience of like, because as much as like many people ask me like, oh, what's similar to the original, what's similar, how's this, a retelling? And it's really not as much as a retelling as it is like a foot in the door, right? Mm-hmm. I say Treasure Island, you immediately have a sense of like what the story might be about. And that's what the remix classics are about, is to challenge and engage your sense of what you think but other than that, I'm not keeping any of the characters. I'm not following any of the same story beats. And really once I make the protagonist like a young queer girl from, a small village in South China, like the story changes completely because her wants, her needs, her expectations, the way society treats her is incredibly different from how like, a young English boy mm-hmm. would have engaged with the world.
Yeah, absolutely. And it certainly gives us a different perspective, not only of a different part of the world, but also a different lifestyle orientation.
Yeah, and it's part of like I want kids to be able to read stories about kids who, like, people who have existed in real life, right? Like, queer people have always existed. We've existed in the past, and knowing that, I feel seeing that in history is valuable, especially historical fiction, right? Because there's so much of historical fiction that is very much from, it's not an accurate representation of what the world was like, right? And many people, if you think about history and you don't see yourself or people who are like you, it's very easy to feel like it's a type of, like it's a form of erasure, right? Like the fantasy that, if you were like, oh, like, there weren't any people of color back in Victorian England. Yes, there were, but the perception of like when you watch like, dramas or media, like you're like, oh, it feels anachronistic when in fact it isn't.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Yeah. And I think that's one of the power of one of book's superpowers is just helping kids reimagine the way that they've been kind of trained to think, helping them understand that there is more to the story. We haven't been told the whole mm-hmm. story of history of the people in our lives, the people who matter, the people who made changes.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah, and I think it's so important also to, I think it's easy for a guy when I was growing up to be able to relate to, a guy in England wanting to take adventures, guy my age, get on the ship and, and battle the pirates and do all that. But it would have been a challenge for me, and a good challenge for me, to have sat down and thought, whoa, girls could do the same thing. Mm-hmm. People in the LGBT community could do the same thing and have the same fantasies, have the same desires. And I think it would help everybody see see that connecting, that thing that connects all human beings together.
Yeah. And there's a question of like, we expect people to relate universally, right, to specific types of characters. And for a very long time, it's been this, like, it has not been universal. It has been, people have been expected to say like, oh, that's something that, every book that you see, every cover that you see, doesn't show who you are. It's a form of like, do I exist? Right. It's that feeling of, do I even exist in the world? And do my stories matter? And I think that now, like, what's been amazing about literature in the past, like 5, 10, 20 years is there's a lot more access. There's a lot more people creating, and a lot more, there's been so many books published, that I think kids today have the opportunity to really see themselves, but also to learn about other kids, other cultures. Like, it's just as important for, like, as you said, for boys to read about girls, and for people to read about, people from other cultures, because I think it broadens your mind, and it helps you develop your sense of empathy as a human being.
Yeah. And that's so very, very important. And that's one of the things that my wife and I did with our kids, was really specifically go out, and because we're a bicultural family, so we read stories about Ireland, and read stories about Puerto Rico, and but we also reached out and made sure we were reading stories from Africa and Asia and other parts of Latin America. And it's sometimes challenging because the kids will turn to you and go, well, what's that? And I'm like, I don't know. This is the first time I'm reading about this stuff. But it's a great opportunity to take a deeper dive with your kids and do that exploration, and to let your kids know that it's okay to be curious. In fact, it's kind of you're letting somebody know that you care about them. It's kind of like giving them a compliment.
Yeah.
Well, I know people are going to want to go to a place where they can read more about you and read more about A Clash of Steel. Where can they find you?
My website is cb-lee.com, and folks can find me on Twitter, Instagram, and TikTok at CBLEE_CBLEE.
Well, we are really appreciative that you took this time to be with us. I know this is all the moments away from your child are precious. So thank you very much for joining us today. Congratulations again. We've had a great time speaking to the author of A Clash of Steel, C.B. Lee. Hey, C.B., thanks for being here.
Yeah, thank you, Jed. Thanks for having me.
Before we invite Oliver into the studio, we want to invite you to connect with us on social media, facebook.com/readingwithyourkids, at Reading With Your Kids on Instagram, and we are at Jedley Magic on Twitter. We would also love for you to visit our website, readingwithyourkids.com. Sign up for our free newsletter, and feel free to reach out to us using the Contact Us button. Join us right now from San Francisco in California. We're really excited to welcome the founder of Immedium Publishing, Oliver Chen. Hey, Oliver, welcome to the Reading With Your Kids podcast.
Hey, Jed, thanks for having me today.
I'm excited to have you on. Tell us a little bit about your publishing house, please.
Sure. We started in 2005, and we wanted to focus on creating wonderfully illustrated and meaningful children's picture books. And since then, we've published more than 50 titles and have focused on publishing stories that have multicultural characters and themes. More than 40% of our stories are in that category, and then now 25% of our books are bilingual.
Wonderful. And what languages are the books published in?
The main language is English because that's our primary market here in America. But as we've been able to do more stories about different cultures, the most titles that are bilingual are in simplified Chinese, and then we've done a couple in Spanish and 2 also in Japanese.
I wish I had known about your books in simplified Chinese a few years back. We've hosted a number of international students in our home, and 4 of the students came from China, different parts in China. And I tried my best to learn a little bit of Mandarin, and they would always just laugh at me and say, that's the wrong tone. You're saying something completely different. And don't try. You're going to hurt yourself.
Well, the important thing is to try. That makes a good host.
I learned ni hao and to say hello and thank you, Xie Xie, and wa ai ni to say I love you. But
those are key. Yeah. So as we've done one particular series on each of the animals of the Chinese New Year, and we're able to visit schools and especially more Mandarin immersion schools here in the Bay Area, teachers have always requested for us to try to consider doing more bilingual books just because there are, as you know, a lack of bilingual books here in America. So definitely as we've gone around the second time of the cycle, we're making each New Year's book bilingual in that case.
Yeah. Well, I definitely want to talk a little bit more about the New Year's book. But first, when you're telling us about your bilingual books, are you talking about a book that is printed in like two different versions of the book, one in English, one in simplified Chinese, or are you talking about a book that features both languages on the same page or opposite pages?
Yeah, we print both languages in the same book. Since our primary market is English speakers here in America, most of our books have been in English, but we've taken the opportunity with enough preparation to do some simultaneously. So it's always been a design challenge to fit all that onto one page, but we think that it's a service that we'd like to provide just because we know there are a lot of different readers who might appreciate our books in different ways, especially parents, and we've gotten good feedback from them.
Yeah, that was definitely something we hear a lot on the show is, oh, my kids asked me to read that book for the 4,000th time and my head's going to explode. I love the fact that a book that you're describing is a book that a parent can read in a multitude of different ways. And I think it would be a lot of fun for a parent and a kid to, attempt to read the alternate language.
Yeah, and for us, it's always been our goal to make our books still enjoyable, at least the 10th or 11th time, if not the 4,000th time. And part of that is working with really talented artists. Another part is working with people who can tell a story that works on different levels of meaning, one for a child and one for an adult. So at the 4,000th time, I think anyone's going to be kind of pushed to get mileage out of that. But I think that for us, the Octonauts are a good example. I'll just briefly talk to you about that since I mentioned it. So
sure.
We did the first 4 stories of the Octonauts, and some of your listeners may know them from television on the Disney Channel or on Netflix, but it started with our 4 books. And here's a case where because it became a popular animated show in more than 100 countries worldwide, it has been available in different languages. I'm getting a phone call there. And that's not because we've translated it. It's only because it's proven to be a story that has kind of a universal popularity.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. That must have been very exciting to have a book become an animated series.
Yeah, and there was always, again, a star that we would be shooting for just because we wanted to create stories which had the potential to have a sequel and to be alive in a different medium. And not all of our stories have been able to fulfill that potential, but we wanted to have that ceiling for them to say, the sky's the limit. And so it's been, very instructive and rewarding experience having that happen to the Octonauts. But we see that, hopefully any stories that we published or will publish could have that potential. Yeah.
So let's get back to a series that you mentioned earlier on, celebrating the Lunar New Year and the Chinese Zodiac. Tell us a little bit about that, please.
Yeah. So when I was a child growing up in Los Angeles, there weren't very many books that had Asian American characters in them. I could probably count them on fingers of one hand. And when I became a parent back around 2002, and I was taking my 2 sons to the library and to bookstores, I could still see that there weren't very many books that had Asian American characters, even after 30 years. So one of the things we want to do, in addition to creating really fun adventure shows like books like the Octonauts, was also to create stories which had Asian American characters and themes. And we struck upon this idea. My friend, who was the designer of the first few books, Elaine Chu, she said, even though there have been books about the Chinese New Year, there's never been a series on each of the 12 animals. So maybe you could do that. And I said, well, thanks for planning out the next 12 years of my life. I feel bad if I got to, year 6 or 7 and ran out of gas. But we decided to take the challenge, and we wanted to bring life into this tradition by making the characters boys and girls of the particular species, growing up like kids do in elementary school, making friends, exploring the world, encountering problems, having other characters have kind of stereotypes about them, which they have to either prove or disprove, and in so doing, take these characters off of what might seem to be a two-dimensional placemat at a Chinese restaurant and make them three-dimensional in a way where a child could say, wow, I want to be that character. I want to step into their shoes and live this adventure. And they do themselves in their daily lives. But we wanted to bring these qualities of these animals alive in a way where they could become characteristics that any boy or girl would be happy to share.
You know, it's interesting that you mentioned those paper placemats that are found in so many Chinese restaurants. There are a lot of little pieces of Chinese culture that seems to be familiar to people. A lot of people are familiar with the Chinese zodiac and the year of the rat or the dog or the chicken when I was born.
I'm a rooster.
But we don't get a chance to dig deeper and to really get to learn about Chinese culture. Why is it important for you to kind of not only give kids, Asian American kids, a chance to look at their own culture, but to educate the broader American public?
Well, I think it's a topic which is definitely more relevant today than it's ever been. It's practically in the news every single day, whether, in your case, you have a new Chinese American mayor in Boston, or for me, my father was born in Providence, Rhode Island. He lived in Fall River. I had aunts in Rockton and Saugus and Melrose. And you're familiar with Kowloon out there?
Absolutely. Kowloon is a legendary.
That was created by my grandparents.
Wow.
So my father was the manager, and then when he left, his sister, Madeline Wong, she took it over and she made it into the kind of super restaurant that it is today. So having lived in both coasts and see how generations of my family have gone from kind of restricted employment from laundries and restaurants to any particular vocation, which everyone else can imagine themselves doing, we wanted to not necessarily tell historical stories off the bat, but kind of blend fact and fiction in a way which would make them interesting to any reader from any background. Definitely for Asian American kids and families, they could see themselves reflected in stories which, for the last century of American children's literature, they weren't. But for other people in other cities and states who may not know or have seen an Asian American on their block, they can be exposed to it in a way which hopefully they would find entertaining and educational and prepare them for the time where they would have meet a person and not necessarily view them with any type of preconception, but be more open-minded to, forging a relationship or communicating with them.
What's next for Immedium Publishing? Do you have a book that's about ready to roll out, or perhaps is sitting on a ship waiting to unload?
Yeah, the ship situation is its own podcast there. But we're working on a couple burners, but as you know, people are always trying to plan for the future. The last few years, we've been able to do a really fun series about cool inventions from Asia. We've done stories about how fantastic inventions became popular worldwide, such as ramen, fireworks and gunpowder, and Japanese animation and comics, otherwise known as anime and manga. And again, these were the first times these subjects were ever covered in an English-American picture book. So we're working on kind of the fourth story in that, yet to be determined. But actually for next year, we're working on volume 2 of Awesome Asian Americans. And as you know, with the pandemic, there's been a lot of crazy things happening in our country, one of which was the escalation of, unfortunately, anti-Asian racism. So for us, our book has been at the right place at the right time, because people definitely wanted to know about things, not just protest the bad things that are happening, but look for good role models and stories that could be used in curricula to educate kids, young and old. And for us, we thought this was a great opportunity to continue to learn about cultures and people, and get another 10 women and 10 men who have made a difference in their own particular ways. And so now we're again working with the illustrator Juan Calle, who has done a number of our books in the past. He also was the illustrator for Letitia's book. And we're aiming for this to be out in September of 2022.
That's wonderful. So important for all of us to be able to learn about folks from different cultures, so that we can become friends and we can dispel a lot of the fear that the unknown might present to us.
Yeah, and I think, with all the problems that we're facing in the world, we always have to rely on the next generation to help solve them. And part of that is through education. And we know that in the news today, a big Achilles heel is miseducation or lack of education. And so we're definitely learning things about different countries and their histories that we never learned in school. Mm-hmm. And hopefully we can bring that to kids next year and into the future.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, I'm excited for you about especially about the book about ramen. I think you're going to find a big following for that in some of our nation's college campuses.
Oh, yeah. Well, we do cover instant ramen, and it's part of the story, spending a quarter at your local 7-Eleven. But there is a history there which involves America, and how, as a little snippet, after World War II, America became basically the protectorate of Japan, and they imported all this flour from America's heartland to a country who had basically been devastated. Mm-hmm. And so Asian countries weren't used to American wheat, and that became the basis for ramen. So there are a lot of linkages here to be made, which really can kind of propel these stories, not just beyond your taste buds, but into your head.
Yeah. One of our daughters from China is what used to have the most intense ramen. It was so spicy. I mean, you could see it. You could practically see flames coming out of it. It was insane.
Yeah. Well, I think with all the things you see today, whether it's hot sauce or stuff from Costco, it's sort of ubiquitous now, and it really wasn't that way, 10 years ago. Mm-hmm. But we were lucky to go to Japan ourselves on vacation before the pandemic, and having been there for 2 weeks subsisting off ramen, we thought we would never eat any more from America, because it just wouldn't match up.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. I'm sure. Well, I know people are going to want to know where they can go to find out more about all the really wonderful books that you are sharing with the world. Where's a great place to find you?
Well, if you don't have time to go to your local independent bookstore, you can definitely check out our titles on our website at Immedium, IMMEDIUM.com. And every book has its own page, and they're also categorized by different areas of interest. And we've done ebook versions of our stores as well, which are available through public libraries and other apps such as Epic for kids. And so we're trying to make our stories available on any particular platform, because it makes it easier for families to find us.
Yeah. And, Oliver mentioned your independent bookstore. It's a really great idea. Even if you can't find it on the shelves, you can ask your local bookseller to order the book. They can get it there in 2 or 3 days, and it's a great way to let some of your local bookstores make them aware of what Oliver and his team are doing, and that would be a big help to Oliver and a big help to your community, I think.
Yeah, we're definitely big supporters of schools, libraries, and independent retailers.
Yeah. Hey, Oliver, we've had a great time speaking to you. We've had a great time learning all about Immedium Publishing from the founder, Oliver Chen. Oliver, thanks so much for being with us.
Well, thanks very much for having me, Jen, and I look forward to sharing our stories with your great listeners.
Please be sure to join us for the next edition of the Reading with Your Kids podcast. It's another Reading with Your Kids Rewind edition. We're going to be looking back at some of our favorite moments with our Dean of all things STEM and STEAM, Jennifer Swanson. I want to thank the folks who made today's show so wonderful. Of course, I want to start by thanking our guest, C.B. Lee. Please be sure to check out A Clash of Steel. Also want to thank Oliver Chen. Check out Immedium Publishing. I want to thank my team, Alejandra Doherty, Fatima Khan, Rory Grady, Michael Murphy. I want to thank my beautiful wife for all the support she gives me. Most of all, we all want to thank you. Thank you so much for taking the time to join us today. And as always, thank you so very much for taking the time to make the world a better place by reading with your kids. I'll be looking for you in the next edition of the Reading with Your Kids podcast.